Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today on The VUU. We are very, very excited to be able to welcome Julica Hermann de la Fuente to The VUU today. And Julica is a Unitarian Universalist community minister at large, does a lot of different things. And if you saw my Facebook post, I was a little bit fangirling over that Julica was going to join us today. So I'm super excited. Jelica, why don't you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about you so folks can get to know you a little bit.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So my name is Julica, and I just graduated from Meadville Lombard with a community and lay with a degree in lay community ministry. And my calling is to do anti-racism work in Unitarian Universalism. That's what I've been doing before I joined Unitarian Universalism, and now I'm doing it here. And I'm doing that in a variety of different entrepreneurial ways. I collaborate with FAS at Meadville. I'm a retreat leader for Beloved Conversations. I'm a project leader for the College of Social Justice. I'm a coach. I'm a bunch of different things. So I'm happy to be here. I'm really glad that we're having more and more conversations about anti-racism, and I'm really grateful that you invited me. Thanks.
Thanks. And so I wanted to also have our co-hosts introduce themselves and where you're tuning in from.
I'm Aisha Hauser, and I'm in Seattle, Washington.
Good morning, everyone. This is Michael Tino in Peekskill, New York. It's great to be with you. So, Julica, you mentioned that you did this work before you went to Meadville Lombard. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that led up to this?
Yeah, sure. I fell into it actually when I came to the United States as an immigrant. I came from Mexico. That's where I was born and raised. I came to the University of Michigan for college, and my senior summer, I was a diversity facilitator for the Office of Orientation, which is a really interesting experience because basically we bring a bunch of first-year students together into a room and have a "you're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy" kind of conversation. It was a very interesting introduction to the world of social justice education, and I got hooked. Mostly because I would do the same exercises every time and have radically different experiences in the groups. Sometimes people would break open and have these fabulous conversations, and then other times they would build these huge psychological walls, and they're like, "You can't make me," and got really defensive. And I was like, what is going on? Like, I'm doing the same thing. Why is this? What's going? So that led me to graduate school and to doing this work. I've been doing it for over 2 decades now.
And when did you find Unitarian Universalism?
Halfway through graduate school, my grandmother had a heart attack. I used to have this button that said, "Militant agnostic, I don't know, and you don't either." And it really worked for me up until I had to confront death. And then when I had to confront death, I was like, oh, wait, maybe that's not going to work. And so I started exploring Unitarian Universalism then.
And what was your first congregational experience like? I'm always curious about that.
It was not very different from the graduate school that I was in. It was a humanist experience, and the minister was brilliant and articulate, and I felt very comfortable. It was seamless. One room, the other room, very similar. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit, just like that much, about some of the different places that you worked at within the UU universe. And one of those you mentioned real quickly is the FAS at Meadville. Can you speak a little bit more about what FAS is so folks have a sense of that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the FAS Collaborative is an outfit within Meadville directed by Mark Hicks. And it's a space where we figure out how to do religious education and religious exploration better. And I was super excited when I went to Meadville to discover that this work was happening, because I was really hungry for spaces where we look at anti-racism work from the context of faith formation, from the context of what does this mean for us spiritually to be doing this work, because that was what was missing for me when I was doing it before. So, two things worth mentioning, I think, right now. The FAS Collaborative does a lot of different projects, incubators, puts out curricula. I'm a retreat leader for Beloved Conversations, which is one of the programs that we've been spearheading for the past few years that has been really successful. Over 140 congregations are using Beloved Conversations as a tool to start to learn how to have conversations about race and racism and how that's impacting us spiritually. And then the other one that I think is important to name is a new curriculum is coming out in about a month called Creating Theology Together. I'm very excited about that one, and I've been a part of the team of writers helping shepherd this kind of midwife this thing to be born. And so, yeah, I'd love to talk more about that.
So when we were talking earlier, you were talking about kind of your own, I don't know if it's personal philosophy or kind of framework for doing anti-racism work within Unitarian Universalism, and really I would almost say faith-based anti-racism work. So can you take us through a little bit of that?
Thank you, Christina. Yeah, I think that will be helpful. It will certainly help me organize what I'm trying to say. One of the things that I noticed as I became a social justice educator and trainer is that we seem to get stuck and hyper-focused on our individual work. So many people of color that I know are put on these pedestals, these platforms, and they are expected to do the work of educating and illuminating, and white folks are very anxious to prove that they are good people and that they are on the side of progress. And there's a lot of anxiety about demonstrating goodness and willingness to do this work. And I feel like that individual work is really important, and we still have a lot more to do, but it's insufficient. So I've started thinking about anti-racism as something that we need to do in 3 different areas. That first area is the individual work. The work of recognizing our own identity development, where we are, how we are coping with things. And I think that's also especially important for people of color, because when we get put on these pedestals, we're not invited to look at where are we in this experience? How is this impacting us? Where have we been hurt? Where have we internalized oppression? Where do we need to liberate and decolonize ourselves? We don't have enough of those conversations. And that is important. But the other 2 areas that I think are equally important are institutional conversations about how do we actually change our operating procedures in our congregations. I mean, in any organization, but I'm interested in Unitarian Universalist congregations in particular. So what are we doing at an institutional level in a way that no matter who's in the room, the organization is shifting and bending the arc, right? Because otherwise, it depends on who's in the room, it depends on charismatic leadership, it depends on a bunch of things that isn't sustainable. So the institutional work is one that I'm very interested in, and just trying to create new containers for that. That's not where I've come from. I've come from the individual work, but I'm feeling like I want to push out against that and do more of this. And then the other piece is the theological. So the individual, the institutional, and the theological. If we don't talk about how our theologies, how our values and belief systems, how we make meaning, how we decide what is good and right, if we don't look at that more carefully, then we're never going to be able to challenge the status quo, because every time we step outside of our comfort zone, we're going to go back to the things that we believe. And if the things that we believe aren't challenging us to challenge the status quo, then we're looping back, and then the status quo wins again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, all of that makes
okay, good.
a lot of sense. So I have so many questions on all of them. Yeah, no, it totally does. So going back to the individual, one of the things that you said in there was, particularly about POC leaders and being put up on a pedestal. One of the things that you said about in there that intrigued me was being given the time and space to examine our own oppression and examine our own internalized oppression and internalized white supremacy. And that's one of we make so much time for our white colleagues and our white congregations to examine that, and and so many resources.
And we need to. It's
needed.
We need more.
Absolutely. But we tend to lack those tools and time and resource to do it in POC. And I think as we do more POC caucusing and white caucusing, and really, not just giving space for POCs to caucus, but what does it mean to caucus also as white people together? Like, we should be doing something there, in that, as well as the POC caucus not just being a place to go and lick our wounds, but to actually, be able to examine those things that are best examined amongst ourselves.
Absolutely. If we can actually start creating spaces where we acknowledge and are comfortable with the fact that we are developmentally in different places and need different things and have coped with discrimination in different ways. Like, for me personally, it has been such an education in the past couple of years. I've worked more with Mark Hicks, who really does create some space for us to do some of that, to recognize how much I've assimilated. How much of my coping techniques has been about taking care of white folks and how well I do that. And that's embarrassing. And it's also helpful to recognize. And it gives me a whole other panorama of like, okay, what else do I need to recognize and where's my work? But there are very few places where I'm invited to do that work. I look forward to creating more. And can I do a plug-in?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually starting a covenant group for POC through the Church of the Larger Fellowship. And I believe Jessica can share a link for people to sign up. We still have 3 or 4 spots open. It starts next Monday, and it's 8 sessions. I would love to have other folks join us if you feel called to just have a space where we can say, okay, so how is this impacting us? How are we doing? What is the state of our souls? And where are we called to grow? Not just lick our wounds, although it is important to heal. It is important to recognize where it hurts. But if we fall into that victim space, we don't get out of it, right? It doesn't help.
I feel like I'm hearing a couple things in a new way as a white person in this conversation. That I want to hold up. That I feel like I've heard a number of times about how people of color are called upon to teach white people again and again and again. Right? I feel like I've heard that before, but what I think I'm hearing that's new and exciting to me is also creating a space for faith development for people of color that's different from the white people's space for faith development.
That's awesome.
And I just that to me is exciting and interesting, and I love that you're working on it. Am I getting that right though?
That's right. I appreciate you saying that, Michael. We have heard many times, don't ask the people of color to do your work for you, and all of that. That's a pretty familiar trope already. But I think that what we haven't recognized as much is that when people of color are put on a pedestal, they're frozen. You can't, if you move off the pedestal, you fall, right? So there's no room for the spiritual growth. And yes, Mark Hicks is my teacher in leading me to understand that if we frame it from a faith development place, we ask different questions and get different outcomes than if we're just framing it from a sociological understanding of impact and oppression and discrimination and systems, which is all very important. This is an and, not a instead of.
One of the things I've always appreciated, I've heard Mark Hicks say, and I heard it first from him, is what Unitarian Universalism where it has fallen short for people of color has almost been akin to spiritual malpractice. So it's been so rooted in the needs of one group of people, Eurocentric, Protestant, really, I mean, white-centered, that it has completely neglected. And then I really appreciated the term spiritual malpractice. And I think that once, I kind of, as soon as I heard it from him, like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what's been happening. And so what does it look like to now shift and create a different paradigm? So that, because we can't keep saying we want to be diverse or we want more people and just want them to accept whiteness, and rather, I mean, in a way that's rooted in a kind of spirituality that doesn't speak to them. So this is a real paradigm shift, and the work that Blue is doing, and in terms of centering spirituality from a different place, has been beyond inspiring. It's just like, oh, okay, this is the possibilities of because the theology of Unitarian Universalism is not based on race. The theology itself, it is
right.
applicable to whoever wants it, whoever wants to explore it, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. When I first read Mark's paper on spiritual malpractice, it was like a bucket of cold water for me. Like, oh, wait a minute, I've been doing what? Oh, and embarrassing and liberating, a bunch of different reactions, very powerful. And I think that the surge that we're seeing in POC-led and POC-centered work is really important. I think that I do feel very strongly that it's a both and, that we cannot neglect our white siblings or just stop that work, because let's be honest, this is a white majority space. And if we can't help them handle this, then, it's not going to change by itself. But yeah, I completely agree with you. And actually, if I can build on the theological piece, the Creating Theology Together curriculum that I've been involved in recently, I'm especially excited about, because it is taking away the platform of this idea of individualism that is one of the hallmarks of white supremacy culture, and that it is entrenched in our theological approach. So we have to give everybody the space to believe exactly what they want to believe, and it is not your business, and my belief over here and your belief over there. And so we each get to build our own theology, right? So this is actually a spin away from that and say, that's good, that's hopeful. Yes, we absolutely need to articulate our own theology, but if we cannot actually come to a public communal theology, if we don't actually have processes where we shift away from, this is what I believe and it is sacred and you can't touch it, to, I'm willing to give this up and I will meet you halfway because I am committed to your liberation, right? Like, if we can't do that in our congregations, whatever, yeah.
So building on that, and I want to get back to the congregation sphere of the Venn diagram, but we'll do that in a minute, because we're clearly on the theological one right now. It reminds me of a question that I think Aisha had on Facebook this week. Aisha, if it's okay if I paraphrase that, is, what does it say when we talk about spirituality versus racial justice or social justice work in our congregations? And that to so many of our congregations, those are two different things. You'll hear them say, I need to stop doing all that social justice, racial justice stuff and focus on spirituality. And to me, that kind of question kind of is based in what you're talking about in creating our theologies together. So can you speak a little bit more about that, about the program? And
yeah,
I full disclosure, I was on the advising panel, certainly not the writing panel, but the advising panel for Creating Theologies Together.
I'm so grateful to you.
But what I really liked was the way you all were thinking about bringing people through this program. So if you can speak a little bit about that, I'd love it.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to as well. Am I unmuted? I am. Okay. So the first thing I should say is that if you're interested, we are going to be piloting the first third of this curriculum soon. And Jessica, if you would kindly share the Facebook group for the FOSS Collaborative on the chat, that's where you can sign up and name your interest, and then Joy Berry, the Assistant Director of FOSS, will hook you up to be one of the piloting people. So what we did was we came up with the big idea of this program, and we created the startup retreat and the first 3 sessions, and we want to pilot that, and then we're going to do the last 6 sessions. So it's a 9-session program. We imagine it happening once a month. So it's like a church calendar year experience. And I think a helpful way of understanding the curriculum is that it has 3 stages. We start with within work, which is the work that we need to do with ourselves to understand how we have been shaped theologically, how have our lives and how do our identities frame what we believe and how we understand the sacred, the holy, the thing that we hold as good and right. So that's within. Then the second third of the curriculum is among, where we, in our congregation, in our group, start having these conversations about, can we create a communal metaphor? Can we agree that this church has this belief together? Not just my own personal beliefs, but we agree that we are for this, or that we are committed to that. And that's both a spiritual and a social justice piece, right? Like those 2 things are not separate. And then the last piece of the curriculum is beyond, which is the interfaith work that we need to do with our religious siblings to start doing more effective community organizing, because as long as Unitarian Universalists believe that they can put on their yellow shirts and show up and save the day, we're still not getting it. We are still not getting it. We have to show up in communities with so much more humility, with so much more willingness, with an ability to work with people that do not believe everything that we believe, and vice versa, right? Like, if we're going to work with faith communities of color, we're going to have to meet them where they are and not have this holier than thou conversation about their views on this, that, or the other social issue. We're going to have to find a way, because if not, Exhibit A, our current reality, like it's not working.
I want to, because what I put it on the liberal religious educator page, that question, and my frame of reference growing up Muslim was that there is no separating social justice with your faith. There's just none. It's the whole idea. I mean, yes, Islam is based in submission to God, and through that, God's mandates are, you are always to take care of those less than you, right? And so when I hear Unitarian Universalists over and over again say, and it's been amplified, at least in my frame of reference since the white supremacy teaching, is I actually had a white man say to me, I'm against injustice, racial injustice, and I don't want to be reminded of it every day. And I'm like, wow, okay, where do we begin? So I'm an immigrant too, like you are, Julica. And so, I'm like, wow, so who are we if we are, so what exactly is a spiritual place that doesn't at all even think about people in pain, or how do, and yet we have the interdependent web as one of our principles, right? Or at least, as one of the bylaws that we agreed to, calling ourselves Unitarian Universalists. So that's so puzzling. And then I mean, here's what I want to ask you, because one of it was a very long thread. It's kind of still going. I just put it up a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday. But so a few people said, well, I need to first do internal work, then I could do that. Now I'm like, okay, I could, and I hear the value of that, but I also feel like that's still a place of privilege, because when my mother was on welfare when I was a kid, she needed to make sure she got food on the table while she prayed 5 times a day, and still tithe our 10% from our, $50 food stamps. Yep. She still gave away. So I'm like, it's still, to me, curious that people insist on saying it's still a separate thing. Why can't it be simultaneous, that while I'm trying to figure out my place in the world, my spiritual journey, that I know that people are being murdered and deported, and it's just getting worse by the second. So does that make sense, what I'm saying? So that's been my puzzlement, is how are we justifying needing to separate the two, or some kind of to me it feels like I experience as like arbitrary, no, I need to do this first. Once I'm done with that, then I'm going to understand that there is injustice. I'm puzzled by that whole thing.
Yeah, I feel you. Here's how I engage that. Because I'm called to work with white folks and to help them shift. And so the way that I access the space that I need to really be supportive is from a pastoral place. And so the way that I understand it is, the trickiest thing about privilege is that it doesn't feel like privilege. Privilege is insidious, it's invisible, this is just normal, quote unquote, normal life. I'm not special, I don't have privileges. And so when we lift up this other reality, it's a shock to the system. I mean, like, white fragility is both a problem and a real response. Like, people who are having anxiety attacks because of their awareness all of a sudden about the impact of racism in their lives, those anxiety attacks are real. Like, they're not making them up. It's a real response. So how do we handle that, right? I think I'm reminded of a colleague in the College of Social Justice who I just adore. His name is Jean-Luc Desable, and he is Haitian and has decolonized himself, or maybe he never was fully colonized. I'm not exactly sure. But the way that he talks about this work is from a completely different perspective. And the way that he has taught me to think about this is, our white siblings have had their cultural heritage stripped away. So if you look at the American school that Henry Ford ran, and that many other of those companies ran at the beginning of last century, and how these immigrants from Europe came with their foods and their clothing and their language, and it got stripped away, and they were given Wonder Bread and suits and little hats and a little flag to wave. Our white siblings have had a piece of them taken away. And those of us who are embedded and come from cultures where social justice and joy and spirituality and the things that help us be resilient go together, we have a different way of understanding how to be in the world and how to relate to the divine. But it's not our white siblings' fault, right? It's their responsibility. But this is, we're dealing with a cultural heritage problem, lack of cultural heritage problem. And so for me, it's about decentering that right to comfort and that individualism. I mean, I think that by far one of the most helpful documents I have seen and worked with in the past few years is the White Supremacy Culture document by Tino that's available online. If you Google it, I recommend it. I ask everyone to print it and have it on their desk and study it, because those antidotes and those problems, if we stay alert and awake to how white supremacy culture is playing in our hearts, in our lives, we are already half of the journey there. Am I making sense? And did I answer anything you said, Aisha?
You're making sense to me, Julica. I think that, one thing that I would add to what you say is that not only does white supremacy culture strip white people of ethnic heritage, and I, as an Italian American, I feel that tension very, very acutely, but it replaces it with what I've called for years a narcissistic hyper-individualism, right? Like, and Unitarian Universalism sort of claims that hyper-individualistic, narcissistic strain as part of our heritage, right?
Yep.
Like it's Emerson.
Absolutely.
Right? And if we're going to claim that in our heritage and embed it in our religious communities, then of course we're going to have people saying, "Oh yeah, I care about anti-racism, but I don't want to come to church and hear about it." Right? Like, I mean, sorry,
Yep.
but that's just crap. Like, I can say that as like the white person on the show today. Like that's just crap. But of course, I mean, it shouldn't surprise us that we hear that, because what our culture as white people has been replaced with is self-reliance. That our highest aspiration should be this individualistic spiritual pursuit, and that's what we come to church for.
Yeah, and we haven't even begun to start uncovering the place where racism and classism intersect, right? I mean, we need to talk about money and who has money and where did these congregations in the New England get the money and to do the things that they're doing, and where are they still vested? I mean, it's hard work.
And
it's
not
really
only do we
scary.
center it, I mean, we put it in our first principle, and then we use it as a tool, as a weapon.
Say more.
So our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, well, at its base value is a beautiful, in my opinion, a beautiful, beautiful value. What I've seen in congregations it be used as is the glorification of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And the defense of every individual's point of view or thought or privilege, because that's my inherent worth and dignity you're talking about. You can't talk, to me about that or about privilege or about how I see something, because you're attacking my inherent worth and dignity. And so instead of taking that what I believe is the base value of that, of which really speaks to the seventh and hopefully eighth at some point, of really that interconnectedness of the inherent worth and dignity of us all, and really just in some ways, in my opinion, bastardizes it into this kind of what Michael is talking about, this glorification of individuality, that that as a congregation, I mean, like the word congregation,
Right.
if we wanted it to be an individual based place, we wouldn't have called it a congregation. And so getting back to what you were talking about of that, so we've got the theology, we've got the individual part, right? So how do we bring those together and congregate those together in ways that help us move forward?
Yeah. But can I say one more thing about the individual first before I move to the institutional? Because I think the other thing that I want to offer as an approach that I have found very fruitful is shifting from the concept of anti-racism training, where you do it and you check the box and you've been trained, you're done, in the same way that our congregations did welcoming congregations like 30, 20 years ago, but then you actually look at the practices and you're like, I think that I find it useful to use the frame of coaching. When you are in a coaching environment, the already always expectation is that there is more to learn, that there is more to grow into, that there are always opportunities and challenges, and that if we have the right space where you are both supported and challenged, then you can really break through certain familiar patterns or ways of being or ways of thinking or believing that have been holding you back. And in a coaching environment, it's also true that the person being coached is in charge. So rather than having this dynamic where the expert trainer is going to scold and tell the white person how they are being fragile and bad and wrong. Like I have my new favorite metaphor for white fragility is that we like to play whack-a-mole. Anytime anyone shows any white fragility, we start going, wham, 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 wham. You can't do that. You can't do that. Well, yes, white fragility is a problem, but if we slam it down anytime it comes up, then where's the healing? Where is the growth? Where is the space for folks to do the work that they need to do? So in the coaching environment, I expect you to be in charge and to get off your tush. Like, do the thing. Choose the thing you're going to do and go do it. And come back and tell me how it went, and I'm going to support you, and you're going to do the next thing. Rather than this, tabula rasa, I know nothing, please instruct me. Oh, now I have been instructed, and now I am going to be a good ally. I've got my checklist. No, like that's not sufficient for me. Because in the coaching dynamic, you keep coming back for more and more and more. It's not done. So anyway, I just needed to say that.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go. That's it.
Well, I wanted to, because I think one of the things that was completely solidified for me since the white supremacy teaching movement, or whatever we want to call it, has just opened up so much for me. And I realized that one of the things we as Unitarian Universalists haven't done well since 1961, the merger, is teach our folks to sit in discomfort, and therefore we are a spiritually immature people. And so a lot of what you're speaking to, and even what you said, Christina, because I've heard that a lot, you are not affirming my inherent worth when you say the word God, or when you say the words white supremacy, or when you're, and it speaks to a spiritual immaturity that we are genuinely, we collectively, Unitarian Universalists, are we really incapable of hearing words we don't agree with? And because that's part of why we haven't been able to do interfaith work in a way that isn't paternalistic, because we aren't capable. Some people aren't capable, too many of our folks, and that includes everybody, lay and ordained folks. This is true about many, this is not at all, we're not just talking about folks who are sitting in the pews, we're talking about some ministers too, who are just genuinely incapable. And I said, wow, we are a spiritually immature people, that we go right to anger, right to revenge, right to wanting to get rid of the person. How do we make the pain stop? We need to make that person leave, instead of work through. That's been my observation.
Amen. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I am going to be relentlessly optimistic. Like I have to, because otherwise I'm leaving, and I don't want to leave. So should I go back to the institutional then? Yeah? Okay. So the folks at the Western Center, I'm gonna really quickly look at it so that I can say it right. The Western States Center in Oregon, they put together a really terrific handbook called Dismantling Racism, a resource book. It is available online as a PDF. You can just download it. But I always encourage people to go to the website and leave a tip, like just make a donation. Thank you for this book. This was really helpful, because it's really important to recognize the folks who have done this work. So when I encountered this work a while ago, I was like, wow, this is really, really right on. And they are looking at how you shift an organization through different stages of awareness and capacity around anti-racism. And they have, right around the middle of the book, this grid where they take characteristics and highlight how different organizations behave on the journey. And so on the left side, I guess it would be the left, anyway. On the left side, there's the status quo congregation, and then in the middle, there's the multiculturally aware congregation, and then on the right, there's the anti-racist congregation. So I took that framework and I married it to some really amazing work that Reverend Aisha Hauser had done in her capacity as executive director of MUSJA. And she created this rubric of what it looks like when congregations are really hitting the mark with anti-racism work. And I wanted to create a space where we could see where are we on the journey. So I kind of took the Dismantling Racism framework and brought it just to congregational behavior. But basically, I think that we need to look at our practices and our institutional policies and procedures around all different parts of our church work. So our worship, our welcoming, our religious education, our pastoral care, our finances, our leadership, our board work, all of these different areas have white supremacy culture embedded in it. And we need to untangle it. And I would say that some of our congregations are status quo congregations. They are clubs. They don't really care about this kind of work. They're not invested in it. Most of our congregations are multiculturally aware congregations. So they get that it's important to be inclusive, that it's important to recognize different people and bring them in. But they don't have an anti-racist frame. They don't understand that you actually have to dismantle the systems of power that keep whiteness in place as a way of being. And that, I think, that's what I'm very interested in helping congregations do. Find the place where they can make those leaps. So it's about how we operate. It's not about good people earning their badges and showing that they are that they are good and worthy and that they are allies, or for people of color to have this be like an ego trip, like a place where they can finally have some power and do things the way that they think it should be done, but without looking at the systems. I think that the institutional work is looking at the systems that we're doing. So I'm happy to share the rubric that I created. This was part of my thesis work when I graduated from Meadville. The rubric is available in the second of the white supremacy teach-in materials. I'm going to update it because some people have already started helping me realize that the whole piece on welcoming and membership is missing. So we need a new category. So I hope to keep this document alive, and I am always interested in thought partners around this work. So please contact me if you want to.
So one of the projects I think I could speak to, I don't think it's well, I'm going to say it. So I've been working with a group led by Paula Call-Jones about creating an assessment tool for religious educators. Anybody can use it, but it's still in the infancy stage. But it's been super exciting to really think about because we can't change what we don't recognize is an issue. So and nothing happened. If I hear one more time, things are going to happen organically. No, they won't. What'll happen is the status quo remains organically. So unless we're intentional, we can't really look at exactly what you pointed to. What are the different elements of the system? And out of fear, folks go right to revert back to patriarchy. Our default is what we've always known, hence the current administration, right?
Yep.
And to me, one of the crucial things is how we do leadership. Who is empowered? Who is encouraged to be empowered in a congregation? And I would like to think that we are capable of collaborative leadership in terms of authority and working together in a congregation. And there's been so much interesting pushback to that, and from everybody, from mostly white people. And interestingly, our colleagues of color who did go through all the hoops that were put there and, basically say, listen, I did what it took to get here. Don't try to change things now. And so that's been fascinating to me, how internalized oppression has been playing out. And I agree with you. I'm hopeful because I think good or bad, people are talking about white supremacy. So that's huge for us, huge. Whether or not it's huge. And so yay, and as difficult as it is, and there has been some serious ramifications for me, for Christina, for Kenny. I mean, this hasn't been without risk, and it may not be in vain if this faith genuinely chooses to become relevant and move forward to fulfill the potential that I think we have. So I remain optimistic. And it has not been without some serious ramifications and pain.
Yeah, that's important to know.
Yeah, I'll co-sign what Aisha has lifted up is that I too am incredibly, what the white supremacy teaching taught me is that our congregations have a deep hunger for this, that there is, over, what did we end up with, Aisha? Over 600, 800, I can't even remember the number now, congregations who participated. And to me, that says, in whatever way, shape, or form they participated in, and I'm sure that we heard back that there's problematic participation and really great participation and participation that was just, kind of performative. But what it said to me that they were signing up, that they're going to the website, that they're using the materials, what it said to me is that there is that recognition of, we have to do something, right? So going from that middle place that you're talking about of just being kind of liminally aware that we need change, to that place, trying to shift people to that place of, no, you're actually going to have to do something, and that do something that you do is going to hurt, and it's not going to feel good right at the very start, maybe not even at the middle, but at the end, we're going to feel really good. But really, it's that thought that we deserve the comfort, and that we deserve to stay in the comfort.
Yeah.
So I absolutely love the idea that you've said of, trying to shift institutions from that middle to a different side of needing to work, and needing to do some work that isn't comfortable, that holds us in a really difficult place for a while.
And if we can train our people to recognize the discomfort and immediately switch to celebrating. Oh, I'm uncomfortable. Yes. Okay. It's happening. Something's changing. I hate this. I'm going to stick with it, And I see our youth as really our leaders in that. Like they get that, like this. I mean, like you present the idea to them and they go there, right? So I think we can. I hope we can. Yeah.
I think so too.
I think we want to.
I mean, I think that's why we're in the faith together, right?
Yeah.
Because we see something. We collectively see something, and it's beautiful, and we want to be there. Right. So absolutely. So I didn't ask you about this before, and I should have. So are you available to consult with congregations to do some of that work? Like, is that something that you feel like that's what you do? Yeah.
Yeah. So here's how I'm framing it. I am available to coach groups of people in congregations. I am really resisting the consultant model and the consultant label. Because the moment that you think that I'm the expert that's going to come in and fix it, we already have a problem. And I think the other thing that's very true is I don't have congregational experience from the leadership position, right? Like I have not served a congregation as a minister or a religious educator or a director of music or an administrator. So I have been a member of congregations, and I've lived a lot of things in that space, and I certainly have learning from that. But right now, one of the projects that I'm very excited about is a group of ministers that last fall I offered some group coaching to have decided to continue working. And now we're going to use that rubric that I created to look at each of their congregations and where they need to shift. But instead of me being the person that's working with them, they're going to coach each other. And I'm going to support them because we have what we need. Like, we have a bunch of people that know what needs to happen. And if we can come into a space of, let's try things. Let's experiment. Let's take small calculated risks and see what happens, rather than the white supremacy culture approach of perfectionism. Here's the answer, here's the solution, here's the checklist. We need to come to this other place. So I am available for this other space. I am not available to come fix things. I will not. I cannot. No. Yeah.
I think you and I were sisters in another life, Julica, because You and I met a few years ago, and we, immediately were simpatico. But I say that because one of our recommendations to, we just handed in the assessment, the first draft of the assessment to Jessica York. One of our very first recommendations was have groups of religious educators do this together, do the assessment tool together in order to learn from each other. That was exactly what the recommendation. I'm like, you're speaking. I'm like, wow, we literally just talked about that and just said this is what we recommend. So
that makes me super happy.
Yeah. There's definitely something in the air. I guess if I don't know, the arc of the universe, right? But I wonder if there's a collective unconscious that Jung talked about. It is clearly happening in the folks that, mean ill and want to break us apart as a people. But it's also, I think, happening with the folks that are really trying to continue to bend that arc toward justice. And so that's the part that makes me hopeful, is the connections that are being made in different places that weren't there before.
Well, and I appreciate, for some of us, what has happened over the past couple of years is like, no surprise. But it has also lit the fire under the tush of a bunch of people that were surprised. And that's great. Like, come on over, get on the bus. There's more room. Let's do this. Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. I can't wait to see this initiative. Yay. Very cool.
Michael, we haven't given you a lot of chance to enter into the conversation.
That's all right. I say what I need to. So, Julica, you mentioned that there's an opportunity to pilot the first third of it, and the people should go on the FOSS Collaborative Facebook page to talk about that, and I think we're getting the link up for that. When do you envision the whole curriculum being available to congregations?
That is
there a timeline? I don't want to put a white supremacist like.
I was gonna say that's a trick question, Michael, and I am not going there. It will be ready when it's ready. Okay. I don't know. We're gonna engage this organically. It's going to have its birth process. Might be an elephant. Might take its time. Like I don't know.
Is the plan to pilot each third as it seems like it's pilotable?
Even that, I don't know, but my hunch is that we'll do the first third and then finish it and then have the whole thing. Yeah. It was partly a funding thing. It's like we don't have the money to do the whole thing, so let's do what we can do. Pilot it, get more money. You know how that works.
I do.
Michael, I wanted to ask you as we're talking is what have you found to be because you are in spaces that, some of us aren't in, and you are a white male minister ordained. What have you found? I'm going to ask for a hopeful question that has moved any of your colleagues who are stuck in wanting to maintain the status quo, even if they pretend not to. I mean, we know the folks who are pretending that they don't want the status quo, but really are benefiting a lot. What have you found any kind of conversation that you could have with another white man where you've maybe, no, okay, never mind. You made a face.
It's that question is deep and complicated because I think it depends on who, right? So, I think that the most hopeful conversations I've had with people who've seemed stuck have been around basically identifying that there's a dramatic shift happening in how we're seeing this, right? So we talk about, Julica, you talked about how, like panic attacks that white people have when they're in the midst of white fragility are still real panic attacks, right? You said that. And I think that, so people's defensiveness is real. And I think that if we come at it from a place not of, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, but of course you feel that way because the entire culture is shifting away from what you were taught it was. Right? I mean, like you were taught that 2 + 2 = 4, and now we're telling you that maybe it's 5.
Yeah.
right? So of course you're going to get defensive, and of course you're going to resist that. And so those people who are open to thinking, okay, well, let's sit down and you tell me more about why it's 5. Like, if you're willing to have that conversation, then there's hope that maybe you can change and shift and transform, because like the transformation is not easy work. So
no, but then
there
what
are
people
some
were taught were 2 + 2 is 3, and we're trying to teach people that 2 + 2 is 4, because what people were taught weren't it wasn't the reality. I just want to correct that analogy.
Well, it was one way of looking at reality, and I think it was Jake Morrill who used the analogy of when Copernicus said that the sun was the center of the universe. Rather, it used to be that people thought the Earth was the center of the universe, and then Copernicus thought that the sun was the center of the universe, and then we realized that neither the Earth nor the sun is the center of the entire universe. Right? So like there were these 2 dramatic shifts in like 1 century of thinking, and there are still people who think that something's the center of the universe that really is not the center of the universe. And I think it was Bruno, like, right? I know my Jake Morrill metaphor that said that there's not a center, right? So anyone is their own center, because they have their own perspective, right? So each individual perspective is equally, we have to take into account equally, right? And that's a big shift if you're used to being the center of the universe, right? I mean, for the city that our headquarters is in calls itself the hub of the universe, for crying out loud. It's not even like a metaphor, right? That's what Boston calls itself. And right, so like that's the city that our faith was born in, the city that calls itself the hub of the universe. Now, I'm like, we just need to realize that we're not the center of the universe. Those of us who have been taught that we were, right? So it's a matter of shifting reality. It's not even just a matter of this is right and that's wrong.
Yeah, and I love bringing Julica's space into it of yes, and when you're in that space and when you're in that anxiety and just having a really hard time of it, and that's a beautiful thing, like that if you're not feeling, I tell people all the time, if you're not feeling sick to your stomach, you're not doing it right. Otherwise it would have been done. If it was easy, if it felt good, it would already be done. So yes, definitely acknowledging that sick to the stomach place and the beauty of being there. So
yeah, I talk with people often about like how caterpillars basically have to liquefy their entire body in order to become a butterfly. It doesn't stop them from doing it, but they basically have to like dissolve their entire body into a pile of goo and then become a butterfly. I mean, that can't be easy. I don't know. I'm not a caterpillar.
No, I think that's right. I think it is a melting thing, and we are all right now in that middle melting place and figuring it out. I want to offer a reframe that I heard Mark Hicks say recently, just last week. I don't know that Boston is where everything was born, Michael. I would like to suggest that maybe Boston was a detour, an unfortunate detour. But actually, Unitarian Universalism has belonged to people of color always.
Yeah.
And,
amen.
And that we can return from an unfortunate detour rather than having a story that it is centered in that whiteness. That's just one of the places where it has been influenced. It really changes things for me when it already belongs to me, where the universalist impulse has always been with my people, right? Like that's one of the, yeah, anyway, I just wanted to reframe that.
Thank you so much for being here, Julica. Everybody, Julica Hermann de la Fuente, thank you for being here. We do not know who's up next week on The VUU. We will let you all know via Facebook. We have some ideas that will be really exciting. And just want to say thank you to everybody who watched today, is listening to the podcast, and to Julica for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, all.
Bye.